author, columnist, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com, talk show host, and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We are talking today on our special polling edition. Every piece of data and analysis you might need, from President Trump's job approval to the elections in New York later this year. It's going to be quite the show. Please remember, Liberty Nation Radio is sponsored by LibertyNation.com. You can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. And you're on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We're joined by Liberty Nation senior political analyst and longtime host of this here radio show, Mr. Tim Donner. Thanks for coming in to us today, Tim. Much appreciated.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
So, for those of our listeners and viewers who do frequent the pages of LibertyNation.com, sponsor of this here radio show, we are launching this weekend the Public Square, Liberty Nation's poll of polls. It's quite a fantastic bit of get-up. It's going to have some great information, looked at in unique ways if you want to know all the latest polling on what's happening in America. And so, in honor of this momentous event, Tim, I thought that we would devote today's show to talking about the polls, because you and I are firm poll watchers. Both of us, that's our first call in the morning, as we go and check out the different polls and the aggregate numbers and stuff, because we want to get, a feel for where the country's going. Is there a trend that we should be made aware of or should become aware of? And I guess the first and most important poll thing that I want to discuss today, Tim, is President Trump's job approval. Over to you.
Well, I think the thing that stands out to me about President Trump's job approval is that it has remained remarkably steady. There has not been big leaps and bounds and drops. There hasn't been a lot of drama in watching Trump's approval rating. And I think that's as stark a contrast as you could have to Joe Biden, who was over 50% approval or close to it right through the summer of 2021. And then with the Afghanistan withdrawal, he fell through the floor and never recovered. His numbers dropped, his approval numbers dropped by something like 15% steadily after the Afghanistan debacle, and never recovered. And I think part of the difference between Biden and Trump is that Biden was simply someone that people voted for because he wasn't Trump. He had no real distinct identity other than having been, on the public stage for a long time. Whereas with Trump, his support and his opposition has been hardened for the longest time, that you're not likely to see his numbers waver much from the current 46%. Yeah. Might go up to 48, might go down to 44, but it's been very steady. And I think that's a function of the fact that people knew what they were getting with Trump. They didn't first time. They didn't in 2017, but they do now.
Yeah, you pointed out that his average approval now is around the 46% mark. Now, if we look at when he came back to office, January this year, so it was only on 50. So he was riding a wave of approval on 50, and so everything that's happened, if you believe the mainstream media, the end of the world, America losing its standing on the world markets, tariffs, terrorism, and everything you can shake a stick at, and it's 4 points, which 4 points is 4 points, and
let's
as Donald Rumsfeld said, that's not nothing, but it's only 4 points.
Well, let's be clear here too. Every president, even Donald Trump, enjoys a honeymoon period after they become inaugurated, because there's anywhere from 5 to 10% of the country that may not have voted for him, but is actually hoping that he's successful.
Yeah.
as a president and tends to look at the half full glass rather than the half empty. And it's only after a few weeks or months in office that the hardcore opposition starts to spread a little bit to those people that are skeptical. So this is not at all surprising. I mean, the fact that he was up around 50 or even higher, I mean, we all had to know that was going to be a temporary blip
Oh, yeah.
on the screen. And indeed it was. And he came into this 46% range about 3 months into office, 2 to 3 months into office. And he's pretty much remained there ever since, even though left-wing media loves to do headlines. Trump's support plummeting, which means it went from 47.2% to 46.3%.
Yeah.
And they call that a plummet. That's little more, Mark, than wishful thinking.
Yeah, they didn't put the moniker plummets when Joe Biden lost 15 points overnight. Well,
No, they didn't.
Yeah. It was,
No, they didn't. They preferred to point out that he did what the American people wanted and withdrew from Afghanistan, but that dog never did hunt.
It really
American
did.
people. Yeah.
I love that phrase, by the way. That dog just didn't hunt, because
It's a great one.
It's so true, right? That he did what the American people wanted. But sure. So let's say, for example, Tim, I want you to not park your car in front of my driveway. So you park it in my living room. But you did what I wanted you to do. It's, there's a lot of forgiveness in there, if you know what I mean. Yes. So that was such a self-inflicted wound by Joe Biden. And I do wonder if that hadn't have happened, if we would have had, and I still think Donald Trump would have won, because all the economic conditions, the border conditions would have been exactly the same. But I wonder if Joe Biden would have stayed in the race if he hadn't taken that beating that just knocked him down so much and kept him at a low level of approval.
Well, I think that, his debate performance, which settled all arguments about whether he had the capacity to continue as president, I think that was settled in late June of 2024. People saw that he just wasn't up to it. So I think in the end, that he would have had to withdraw anyway, because you can only fake it for so long. But
Sure.
The point is that he was already at a low ebb going into 2024, and then it only got worse for him.
Okay, let's talk about Donald Trump's numbers in specific here, his approval, his disapproval rating. So the current average, if you take all of the main polls for the last month or so, again, and put those together and divide them up. So you got 46% approval against 51.4% disapproval, which is a spread of minus 5.4. 5.4, 5.6%, 5.4%. And so that's 5.4, and that seems that's kind of where we expect him to be, isn't it? Because he has very, very strong support with his base. There doesn't seem to be a lot of wavering. Maybe 1 or 2 points has come out of that. He's got, I would say, almost 40%, maybe a little more on independents. Would you say that's quite fair?
I think the independent vote is totally consistent with someone who won't commit to either the Republican or Democratic Party. They're freelance. They're wild cards. There's no way to know at any given time what independents really are looking for, other than economic stability, peace and prosperity. But when you get into subjects like illegal immigration and deporting criminal aliens and reducing the size of the federal government, these things are by their very nature highly controversial, and can easily be spun by a big media into, well, he's firing federal workers indiscriminately. He's getting rid of important programs. And the average person who doesn't obsess about politics like you and I do, Mark, they don't have the time to look deep into these matters as to whether they support them or not. So people tend to make their decisions about supporting or not supporting a policy based on, a very limited amount of information that is spun against Trump universally. I mean, it's not exactly headline news that over 90% of the coverage of Donald Trump in big media is negative.
Yeah.
Over 90%. And it's been that way for the last decade. So frankly, you can look at his 46% mark and say, that's pretty much the same as Barack Obama over the course of his presidency after he had a longer honeymoon because, of course, he was lionized by the media. But when it all came down, his approval rating really hovered around 45, 46%, just like Donald Trump.
Absolutely right. And now we're going to continue our talk on polling when we get back after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and we're continuing our conversation with a longtime host of this here radio show and Liberty Nation's senior political analyst. They're one and the same person, Mr. Tim Donner. Thanks for sticking around, Tim.
Always good to be here and carry on with our fascinating conversation, at least fascinating to you and me.
It's an 8-year conversation we've been having here, Tim, about polling. It shows no signs of stopping just yet. So for those listeners who have just tuned in, we are talking polling on this special edition show. Liberty Nation has its brand new The Public Square polling launching this weekend. It's great for data, information, graphics, everything you need, plus analysis in one place. Please do check that out on the pages of libertynation.com. Earlier in the show, we were talking Donald Trump's approval rating, which is the big kahuna of the polling world, I think. Even when he's out of office, it's the big kahuna. But Tim, let's get a little more granular and let's talk about the 2026 generic congressional vote. So what that is for people who don't squander their lives following politics and polling like Tim and I. What that essentially is we have the 2026 midterms coming up next year. Which party are you voting for, Republican or Democrat? That's the question. And what are the results, Tim?
Well, I would argue that midterm elections during the era of Donald Trump are more volatile than any in my lifetime because of the fact that midterm elections, by their definition, are grievance elections. Midterm elections are those in which the people who don't like what happened 2 years before, who don't like the incumbent, who don't like the party in power, will show up in greater numbers. And, the Trump people, Trump voters have been largely kind of fat and happy since not only Trump won, but the Republicans won control of both the House and the Senate. So they've been kind of fat and happy and quite satisfied with how Trump has performed. But the grievances on the other side are, of course, legendary, as most epitomized by the 3 assassination attempts, 2 on Trump and then the successful one against Charlie Kirk. So, the party out of power generically has a huge advantage in midterm elections because the people that are dissatisfied, what do? People that are angry, they vote. People that are satisfied don't tend to vote as much. But it's also true that the Republican Party, with Donald Trump on the ballot, as in presidential election years, is a totally different animal than the Republican Party where Trump is not on the ballot. The Republican Party writ large if you stripped Trump away from it, who knows how popular they might be. But I think that I'm not surprised that Democrats have a slight advantage in the generic ballot. And I'll tell you the truth, if they can't win control of at least one of the branches of Congress in 2026, they are in even deeper trouble than we thought they were.
Yeah, very much so. So the just to give a number to that, the average is about 3% up across the board. Now, there's a couple of caveats there, Tim, that I think we should go into. Is one is that these polls, they're conducted spread across the country.
Okay.
So, and the second part there, Tim, is that in the last set of midterms, 2022, Democrats really had this major cudgel with which to beat their own voters and to try and scare off Republican votes, I guess. And that was the overturning of Roe v. Wade, made possible by Donald Trump's nomination of 3 Supreme Court justices during his first term. And I'm wondering, do they have a specific political weapon of the same vein that can be employed for 2026? Or is it just going to be a general throw it all against the wall and see what sticks?
Well, midterm elections, in addition to being grievance elections, they're also issue elections much more than presidentials. So the Dobbs decision overturning Roe versus Wade was a very animating factor in 2022. Trump wasn't on the ballot, nor was Biden. It was an issue election. And thus, it's not surprising that the Democrats came so close to, taking control of the House. And Joe Biden would have been wise to quit then while it was ahead. But that's a different discussion. The mistake that the Democrats made was to think that the Dobbs decision, the abortion issue, would carry over effectively from 2022 to 2024, which led them to a totally woman-based campaign at the expense of the male vote. And we all saw how that turned out. The vote among men was a sword right through the heart of the Democratic Party. So I don't see an issue right now that the Democrats can hammer on a single issue. But I do see where if we are facing a possible recession or inflation again rears its ugly head, or Trump, ventures into a disastrous military engagement. Those are prospective things that will get voters to the polls and vote against Republicans. But none of that stuff is true right now. Unlike in 2022, when you knew that Republicans were girding their loins for the blowback against the overturning of Roe versus Wade.
We'll be watching the weather vanes. Audience, don't go anywhere. We'll be back talking more polling after this short break.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain Mark Angelides. We're continuing our talk on polling with Liberty Nation senior political analyst and longtime host of this here show, Mr. Tim Donner. Thanks for sticking around, Tim. Now, just to cue in our audience who maybe are just joining us now or just watching this segment, we've been discussing the big polling that's been taking place in honor of Liberty Nation is launching its very own The Public Square Polling Analysis Center this weekend. Do go to libertynation.com and check that out. Now, Tim, earlier we talked President Trump's job approval, which many see, and I certainly see it as one of the biggest and most important polling trends that we can watch as political watchers. And then we discussed the generic ballots for 2026, which obviously there's a lot more data to still come on that because we are still a long way out. But some would argue, and they might not be wrong, that the most important polling to watch right now is what's happening in a little place called New York City. What say you, Tim?
Well, the Democratic Party has a terrible problem. And his name is Zoran Mamdani, because of the fact that he is a self-proclaimed democratic socialist, which essentially means he's a socialist, which essentially means, in the eyes of Donald Trump and others, he leans towards communism, basically collectivism. Let's call it collectivism because it sort of covers the waterfront. It's a good umbrella term. And, people in the Democratic Party and among Republicans, conservatives, liberals are kind of stunned that Zoran Mamdani not only won a landslide victory over Andrew Cuomo and others in the Democratic primary in Manhattan, but the fact that he seems to have an insurmountable lead to win the general election, even perhaps if two of the other three candidates drop out. I'm still not sure that he would be beaten. So everybody was shocked, but you know what, Mark? They shouldn't be, because we have some good information from a couple of polls, one of them conducted by a left-wing outlet, and the others more mainstream, showing that almost 2/3 of Democrats say that they are open to socialism and prefer it to capitalism. Think about that. Basically, almost 2/3 of Democrats identify more with socialism than with capitalism. And so we really shouldn't be surprised that Zoran Mamdani is as popular as he is. He's also a well-polished candidate. Yeah. He smiles well. He does good political commercials. He can even engage in fairly decent self-deprecating humor. He's an attractive public candidate because he presents very well to young people. But his popularity and the fact that he's going to win this election presents just an almost insurmountable problem for Democrats, because the rest of the country, Republicans and independents, which account for about 2/3 of the electorate, figuring Republicans and Democrats are roughly equal, but are outnumbered by independents, who are more than 40% of the,
it's about 40-30, yeah.
It's about 40-30-30. It's a terrible problem. And you can see it by the fact that here's the most high-profile Democrat who was nominated in 2025. And yet the Democratic leader of the House and the Democratic leader of the Senate have refused to endorse him, at least yet.
At least at time of recording, yeah.
At time of recording. Now, Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, finally, in the most tortured way, finally, begrudgingly decided to endorse Mamdani, because I think for her it was a lesser of two evils. She wanted to be seen as a team player. But if Schumer and Jeffries come out and endorse him, then they know perfectly well that the Republicans will run those endorsements, will run the Mamdani extremism around the clock during the midterms. And so it's a terrible conundrum for them, and it's one they have yet to figure out. But you know what? The fact that the Democrats have bowed to the most progressive, radical wing of their party, those are chickens that are coming home to roost, because now they've convinced enough Democrats that socialism is the way to go. And this is a disaster going forward. And, so-called mainstream Democrats recognized that when they ran Bernie Sanders out of the presidential primary, not once, but twice.
Twice, yeah. Yeah, it's the kiss of death nationally, but it works well in small pockets. Yes. For example, New York City, it's probably one of only 2, maybe 3 places in the country that could get away with running a candidate like that.
And the fact that it's isolated this year,
Yeah.
because a year after a presidential election is the least important or has the least number of national races by far. So the few that there are,
Jack Chitterelli wants the word with you. He's on the phone.
Enormous attention. So if Mamdani was running in 2028, he'd be sort of a footnote because there's so many other races. But here, he is front and center. This race is front and center. You got gubernatorial races in Virginia and New
Jersey. Yeah.
But other than those two, there's no national spotlight on anyone but Mamdani in the New York City mayoral race.
I wonder if Governor Kathy Hochul's endorsement of Mamdani was as what's the right way to say this without being insulting in any way? If it was 30 pieces of silver more than anything else, because she's got a race coming up at some point as well, and early indicates that I think it's Stefanik. It will be challenging her for the governor's mansion.
Lee Stefanik, representative from New York, yes.
And Mamdani, Zohran Mamdani, has, as you pointed out, he's very polished. He has a great social media game, and it's really great. It's like it's like his mother, the internationally renowned film director, actually taught him a couple of things about how to put some nice polish on some videos and things. And I'm wondering if the endorsement didn't come with a little bill there, a little price tag, and that price tag is you've got to boost me to the rest of the state. You've got to push for me in return for my support for you. And now this is the kind of thing that happens in politics all the time, but I can't get that the whiff of there's some quid pro quo going on there. Or do I have this wrong?
No, of course, there's always quid pro quo in politics, and who knows what the quid or the quo are. But I think what Kathy Hochul's trying to do is what some of us call putting lipstick on a pig.
Yeah.
It's still a pig, but you can put lipstick on it to make it look good and appear good. And I think if Hochul's smart, what she would have tried to get in return is for him to promise not to pursue his most radical policies, to rethink, laying more taxes on the geese that have laid the golden eggs in New York, the corporations and the wealthy who pay an outsized share of taxes who would be driven out of New York if Mamdani is elected. So I think maybe, I'm sure he'll endorse her next year in her run for re-election. But is that something she really wants? I'm not sure about that, because there's a lot of outside of New York City and Buffalo and to some degree Albany. New York is actually a very conservative state. You go upstate New York and central New York and western New York, and for the most part, it's Republican leaning. So I don't know that. I think maybe it might be the opposite.
Could be a poison apple, yeah.
He might have said, I'll endorse you. Hochul says to Mamdani, I'll endorse you, but you've got to promise not to endorse me. It could be that, because
it's a thing.
To anyone outside of New York, Mamdani is poison outside of New York City.
So let's just dig quickly into the numbers before wrapping this up. So an average of polling, I think, has Zohran Mamdani ahead, assuming Andrew Cuomo, Curtis Sliwa, and Eric Adams run. He's got an 18-plus point lead on average at the moment, which is kind of insurmountable. Do you think that all four of those candidates will be campaigning come November?
Well, I think the wild card in the race at this point is Andrew Cuomo, who I have to say it was stunning to me how totally ineffectual he was in his primary run against Mamdani. He looks like a spent force. He looks old. He looks tired. He looks like a has-been, to be totally honest with you. And so given that, it's not surprising that he was beaten so badly by this, 30-year-old upstart that nobody had ever heard of who calls himself a socialist. He's the wild card in the sense that can he somehow consolidate the anti-Mamdani vote? Can he scare enough people into not voting for Mamdani in order to come from way behind and win this election? The truth is, there's not a chance in the world he can do that if at least Mayor Adams or the Republican candidate Curtis Sliwa drop out. And Sliwa has basically said, now he has a pretty big vote share too of about 20%. Sliwa says he won't drop out because he's raised a lot of money. What he says is, I don't want to give this money back. I was given this money to run and I'm going to run.
Yeah.
And Mayor Adams, you see, he's played footsie with the Trump administration a bit, maybe talking about getting an appointment as an ambassador or something. But Eric Adams is in single digits.
Yeah.
So that won't do it. Cuomo, I think, has no intention of dropping out. So then the only chance is that Curtis Sliwa changes his mind. But at this point, the odds have to be at about 90% that Mamdani will be next mayor of New York.
Yeah, it would take a very extreme coalition of the unwilling to get together. And even if you add all those up, you're probably talking, 46% or something against Mamdani's 43 to 45.
Well, there's been a couple of polls that came out, or at least one that said even if Adams and Sliwa dropped out, Mamdani would still beat Andrew Cuomo. So take those polls.
Yeah. I think the New York Times Siena, if you tally up the three, I think it was exactly the same that they got. All three, Sliwa, Adams, and Cuomo, all three together, same as Mamdani. But yeah,
right, it's true. Those the three other candidates total added up is the same as Mamdani, give or take a point or two.
It's his race to win, and New York's experiment with socialism to find out what happens there. We'll be watching it on the pages of LibertyNation.com, especially our new Public Square polling extravaganza. We'll be back with Tim after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain Mark Angelides. Continue our conversation with longtime host of this here radio show, Liberty Nation senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner. Tim, and our dear audience, we've been discussing polling in light of the new Macy's version of the Public Square that's opening up on the pages of LibertyNation.com this week, where we'll be examining all the different polling, giving you some great graphics, some great analysis on all the big races that are coming down the pipeline. And so we've already discussed President Trump's job approvals. We've discussed the generic congressional ballot for 2026. We've discussed probably the most important race this year, the Mamdani contest. I hesitate to call it an actual contest, but Mamdani's coronation in New York, although, of course, being a socialist, he might refuse the crown.
No royalty.
No king.
This is the United States.
Yeah. I did love watching the coverage of Donald Trump in the United Kingdom, because even though it's all very much no kings, you guys sure do love a bit of pomp and circumstance. The amount of coverage of Trump's visit to the United Kingdom and the state banquet was quite something to watch, and I like it. I love the pomp and circumstance. Please do check out the photo journal that we have on the pages of LibertyNation.com. So let's talk about the final quarter of what I think are the most important polling segments to watch, and that is the right direction, wrong track. Now, for those of our listeners and viewers who aren't familiar with what that is, that's really what would you say, Tim? It's a poll of sentiment. Do people think the country's going in the right direction, or do they think this national train is on the wrong track entirely? Give us the details.
Well, I think that what this is a poll about optimism.
Yes.
Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the country going forward into the future as far as you can see it or surmise it? And I think that's why it's particularly useful, because politicians make decisions that make them more or less popular. Politicians have good weeks and bad weeks. Parties win elections and lose elections. But the direction of the country tends to strip out the pure partisanship involved in things like Trump approval ratings and generic congressional ballot, and boils it down to its basics. And I think really the most startling contrast in pivoting from the Biden presidency to the Trump presidency, the second Trump presidency, is the really dramatic increase in the number of people who feel the country's moving in the right direction. It was below 30 with Joe Biden when he left office, and it was above 40 with Donald Trump after 2 or 3 months in the Oval Office. And this, to me, is the most reflective of, I would say, the most powerful of all the polling, because it tends to the greatest extent possible, strip away the pure partisanship. And so someone on the left can say they like the direction of the country, even though they didn't vote for Trump. And people on the right can say, I voted for Trump, but I don't like the direction of the country. And the name Trump or Biden or anybody else doesn't enter into it. And I think looking at that, look, it's sort of like approval of presidents. It never goes above 50%. I've never seen the direction of the country be above 50%, no matter who was in office. Bush, Obama, Biden, Trump. It's never really been above 50%. So if you can come close to 50, you're doing well. And Trump has been in the 40s. Now, we'll track that very closely, of course.
Yeah, it's, as you say, it is very much about optimism. And I think part of what goes into this particular bit of polling is very much what's happening economically. So people consider their wallets and they consider their job and business prospects, depending on if they're employed or self-employed. And they look at these things and they think, am I happy to be expanding my business in the coming year? And if they think conditions are right, that's a very optimistic sentiment. And they'll probably go for, the country's on the right track. Because we say the country, what we really mean is, are things on the right track for me? And that's what it all comes down to.
Yes.
It's the individual. Although if you're in New York, you might say, hey, but what about the collective? What about the socialist collective?
The collective, its mindset.
Tim, final word on this. Do you think that coming into the 2026 midterms, that the direction of the country data will be going up or down from where it is now? Final word.
Well, I think it all depends on the direction of the economy. If we get economic growth that pushes up towards 3%, the jobs numbers improve, the number of people in the workforce, that's a critical factor. If that increases, I think you're going to get, my sense is you're going to get that same general sense of economic well-being that people had during Trump's first term, when in February of 2020, it looked like Trump would be on a glide path to re-election until the pandemic came along. And most of that was because of the strength of the economy. So it all pivots on the economy.
Tim Donner, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Had a great time, Mark. Thanks.
And that's what we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guest today, Tim Donner, Senior Political Analyst over at LibertyNation.com, and you, the listeners, who take the time each week to tune in and join us. Please do remember to go and check out Liberty Nation's brand new polling, The Public Square, over on the website. And Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.